All right, here's a thought. You're at a seafood restaurant, staring at a menu, and you notice those little buzzwords: sustainably farmed, eco-friendly, and maybe even organic shrimp. And you're like, wow, I'm basically saving the planet by eating this salmon. But are you really? That's the big question we're tackling today. How environmentally sustainable is aquaculture? So, in case anyone didn't know, aquaculture is the production of food and other products in water. And although aquaculture may make you think of fish farming, which is its largest component, it does also include the farming of other aquatic animals, such as shrimp or oysters, as well as farming of aquatic plants, most notably seaweed. So, at aquatic farms, operators raise and feed aquatic plants and animals in a limited area, which is mostly for human consumption. And popular types of finfish who are raised in aquaculture include carp, salmon, tuna, flounder, and tilapia. So, let's say you're a fisherman in ancient China. What do you think would be the most reliable way to get your fish? Wild fishing? Or maybe starting a farm? But before we get into our modern day debate, let's rewind back a bit because aquaculture is way older than most people realize. Did you know that aquaculture dates all the way back to 2000 BCE in China? Yeah, the ancient Chinese were farming carp thousands of years ago, and the Romans, yeah, they were out here cultivating oysters. So I've got a question for both of you. What do you think motivated ancient civilizations to start farming fish instead of just catching it?
So it would have to be efficiency, right? If you can farm it, then you've got loads of fish there, and you could probably catch more with
Yeah,
relatively less effort.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, for me, I also agree that it's about efficiency and survival
So I
because,
guess he who can catch the most fish would probably have a pretty decent survival advantage.
yeah, exactly. It would have given them a very reliable food source. And especially in the kind of regions where these wild fish might have been quite seasonal or hard to catch. So I think it's quite smart, to be honest.
I mean, I think anyone who's tried fishing these days knows just how difficult it is. So I can't imagine what it'd be like, 2000 BC if you've got just a stick and a bit of string.
Yeah, exactly. They wouldn't have had all of the massive ships and everything that we have today. It would have literally just been stick and rod. Or did they have ships? I don't know.
I guess you'd have to be a pretty decent spearfisher if you wanted to have
Yeah,
have fish regularly.
exactly.
I heard some new article about this that they use rice fish farming before, and then I think it is a very brilliant idea. Like you have the rice fields, and then you put fish in it, and you're gonna make a pond, and it's like two birds in one stone. And it is also helpful if for example for the mountainous area, like they have a protein source aside from chicken or any farmed animals.
Yeah, exactly.
You'd say mountain area, would they have to carry the fish up the mountain in the first place to get them there?
Yeah.
Imagine one of those really long like fish lines you see, it's like a really like long tube all the fish like swim through.
Oh, yeah.
Could be.
Okay, so moving on to the cases for aquaculture. So with wild fish stocks depleting, do you think that aquaculture is the future of seafood? Or should we be looking elsewhere?
Well, there are obviously quite a few points for aquaculture, so reasons why we would want to use it and reasons why we do use it. So, obviously, it gives us quite good food security and it helps us to meet the global demand for seafood. So, yeah, there is also like aquaculture does play quite a massive role in reducing the pressure on wild fish stocks. So I'm sure we've all heard about overfishing and aquaculture. I think everyone just sees it and it is quite a good way to overcome the overfishing problem because obviously you're raising fish from the very beginning and cultivating them. So there's constantly population growth. It's just a lot different to just fishing wild fish.
So would you say it's more beneficial to the wild fish?
I'd say, well, there's a lot of different points actually to think about here because obviously it is quite beneficial to a lot of wild fish that are in decline because we're not overfishing them so much by using aquaculture systems. However, there are a lot of things involved in aquaculture that aren't beneficial at all to wild fish. So, I mean, we'll discuss those a bit later, but things like transgenic fish escaping into the environment, and obviously things like habitat destruction and antimicrobial resistance. But if we're just thinking about overfishing, then I do think that aquaculture is a lot better than fisheries and things like that.
I mean, mutant fish, I reckon that'd be a good plot for like a new X-Men film or something like that. Escaping
Yeah.
into the ocean. Obviously, I'm from like sort of an economic point of view then. Do you think aquaculture can actually benefit local economies? Especially in places like local areas that are probably more dependent on fishing in general.
I think aquaculture can really benefit local economies, especially in coastal areas, because it creates stable year-round jobs in fish farming, processing, and any like supply chain services. And it also helps diversify income sources for the communities by reducing the reliance on seasonal wild fisheries. For example, the US aquaculture industry has had a significant economic impact, contributing billions of dollars and supporting thousands of jobs. So I think it really helps the local economies.
So, do you think aquaculture can fully replace traditional fishing methods? And if so, what do you think would be some sort of potential challenges?
I think aquaculture can help reduce our reliance on traditional fishing, but it might not fully replace it because there are still challenges like managing environmental impacts, preventing diseases in farmed fish, and making sure it's done sustainably on a larger scale. We need to take a look into that point of having aquaculture.
Yeah, I do think that aquaculture is unlikely to ever completely replace traditional fishing. And I think a lot of reasons kind of come down to more cultural reasons, actually, which is quite interesting because wild caught seafood actually remains quite culturally significant in a lot of regions. And there are certain species, so like tuna or cod, these are still a lot more economically viable to catch in the wild rather than to farm. So, yeah, I don't think that it will completely replace traditional fishing, but I think that it can complement it. Aquaculture can really help to reduce pressure on wild stocks, and this can ensure quite a steady seafood supply for upcoming generations and our increasing population. But I do think that we need to really focus on finding the balance and also really addressing the challenges that we're facing with both aquaculture and traditional fisheries.
I like that you sort of touched on the cultural elements there. Obviously, I guess that'd be quite a concern for a lot of
Yeah.
people. 'Cause obviously, if you think of like culture, the first thing you really think about is things like food. So for potential consumers, do you think it's possible to notice any difference in maybe sort of like the quality between sort of farmed or wild caught seafood?
I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty sure that I can taste the difference between farmed and traditionally fished salmon in particular. I mean, I don't really, this is quite bad, but I don't really look a lot at what I'm eating and where it's coming from. But on the kind of occasions that I have really noticed that fresh caught fish and fresh caught salmon that haven't come from aquaculture facilities have been a lot nicer. But that could just be me, and I could just be making that up.
I mean,
But
no, I'm with you. I think a lot of people probably concerned about where their food comes from, especially with all the like topics and like conversations about sort of climate change. People are always trying to see what's like the best thing they can do to sort of limit their impact on the environment. And
yeah,
I guess if you're getting
exactly.
locally caught fish, that's probably got to be quite beneficial.
Yeah, exactly. I just think that farmed fish just taste a bit different.
Actually, like when I was in the Philippines, we have a farmed shrimp and then like a widely caught shrimp. If I eat the widely caught shrimp, it is more tastier than the farmed one.
Yeah.
But it is smaller and the farmed one is like bigger and more cleaner. When you look at it while cooking, however, the taste is different. The wild caught shrimp is much better. It's like there's a taste in it that I really love to eat every time.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It would also come down to the diet of the farmed fish. So I know that farmed fish are fed quite a high energy diet, and this is to promote their growth. And this like includes ingredients, so like fish oil, plant-based oils, grains, and these sources obviously are quite rich in omega-3s, but I guess these can also increase the levels of saturated and polyunsaturated fats in the fish that we are eating from these aquaculture farms. I don't know about you guys, but I take omega-3 vitamins every day. So maybe I should be eating more aquacultured fish.
I think that's definitely something that a lot of us would benefit from as well. So, have you heard about algal blooms then that have been caused by nutrient runoff from these fish farms? So, what impact do you think that this can have on local ecosystems?
I want to know how these algal blooms are happening. It's because particularly the fish farms in the open water, they release a lot of waste, so like uneaten feed and excrement into the surrounding environments. And then obviously these waste products are very rich in nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. So while these nutrients are quite essential for aquatic life, too much of them can really trigger these algal blooms. And I do know that I remember learning in my undergraduate degree that when the algae grows out of control, they consume a lot of oxygen in the water. So this can lead to kind of dead zones in the water where the oxygen levels are so low that the marine life struggles to survive. A lot of fish kind of flee the area to get out of these algal bloom anoxic areas, or they die. And this obviously disrupts the food chain.
You can see the fish like floating after an algal bloom.
Yeah.
Something out of a horror film, that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. It's like they're just floating there, that dead.
I don't think I've ever seen an algal bloom.
I heard news like back in my country, and the fish are just floating. And then I also had like incident. I had an aquarium before when I was in my primary grade, and then because of the algae that grew into my aquarium because I hadn't cleaned it, and then the fish are just floating. So it's the same in the news like back home.
I think algal blooms can also be quite toxic to humans. The toxins can accumulate in shellfish and things, and this obviously makes them unsafe to eat. But yeah, these algal blooms can cause respiratory problems for people living near kind of affected areas, which isn't great. I do know that the aquaculture industry is quite aware of this problem. And I do know that they are using different systems to try and counteract these issues. So they're using closed systems or recirculating aquaculture systems to try and prevent nutrient runoff. And then I do also know that a lot of other aquaculture farms are integrating aquaculture with seaweed or shellfish farming. And these seaweed and shellfish act as natural filters, and they absorb excess nutrients, and thus kind of reduce the risk of algal blooms. But still, I do think it is quite a delicate balance to manage nutrient runoff effectively, and it's really essential to ensure that aquaculture really doesn't harm the ecosystems that it is depending on. What do you guys think? Should there be stricter regulations in place to control nutrient runoff, or do you think that these systems that they have at the moment, like the closed systems or the recirculating systems, are enough? Like, are they on the right track, do you think, or do you think there's anything else they could be doing?
I feel like there kind of has to be probably some tighter regulations for it, especially if you think about sort of fish farming. You got to think about it in sort of like every culture. So I heard in it's like Southeast Asia, they've seen the destruction of I think it's about 40% of all the region's mangroves due to shrimp farming. And so I think it's one thing obviously us having changing laws here. It's really a global effort. I think that probably has to be made. But like, how do you guys feel? Obviously, I know the public probably won't appreciate it that much. Obviously, it's the topic of destruction of habitats for the purpose of shrimp farming. Is it worth it for the products that you get from these farms?
That's a tricky one.
For me, it is concerning if they're destroying, for example, mangroves,
Yeah,
because mangroves they are very important.
yeah, I think in particularly it is the mangrove farming the mangrove destruction, which is like really problematic because
What,
I'm sure that most of us know that these are some of the most vital ecosystems on the planet.
what is it about the mangroves then that makes them so crucial for coastal protection and biodiversity?
There's quite a few things actually. So they act as buffers against coastal erosion, so they can protect countries, and especially when we're in kind of a time of climate change and we're getting more sort of natural disasters. I think them acting as buffers against coastal erosion is so vital. But not only that, they provide habitats for countless species, and also related to what I just mentioned about the kind of climate change and how mangroves help mitigate that is they really do help protect coastal communities from storm surges and flooding. So we are destroying these ecosystems to make way for, I think, specifically shrimp farming.
It's terrible.
Yeah, it's really bad. Comes with a very heavy environmental cost. And also, these mangroves provide a very critical nursery habitat for a lot of marine species. And so, by removing these mangrove habitats, we're not only losing biodiversity, but we're really undermining the natural resilience of coastal ecosystems.
So how do you think then we should balance the demand for shrimp with the need to protect the mangroves?
Well, there are some solutions that are currently emerging. So, mangrove-friendly shrimp farming practices. But yeah, these initiatives are kind of focusing on the restoration and preservation of mangrove ecosystems while farming shrimp in a much more sustainable way. So, some farms are even integrating mangroves into their operations, which is almost creating a symbiotic relationship where the mangroves help filter the water and protect the shrimp farms from storm damage. But I do think that the key here is really ensuring that the shrimp farming practices evolve to protect rather than to destroy these really, really critical ecosystems.
What do you think about sort of the spread of diseases then spreading from farms to wild fish populations? Like, is this manageable at all?
I think the risk of diseases spreading from farm to wild fish populations is a serious concern, as we've seen with sea lice infestations in salmon farms in Scotland, which have harmed wild salmon populations. To manage this, it's important to implement stronger biosecurity measures, better farm management practices, and regular monitoring to prevent the spread of diseases from farm to wild fish.
Is it really as sustainable as it seems? Quite a critical concern for aquaculture is antimicrobial resistance. So, I mean, obviously, it is a growing issue, which is not just for the aquaculture industry, but for global public health in general. So, for those who don't know, antimicrobial resistance occurs when bacteria evolve to resist the drugs that were once effective against them. So, whether it's antibiotics or antifungals, all sorts of things like that. So, in aquaculture, um, the use of antibiotics to prevent or treat diseases in farmed fish can really contribute to the development of these resistant bacteria. And these could eventually spread to humans, other animals, or also the environment. So, in aquaculture, antibiotics are sometimes used in quite large quantities, and this is to keep fish healthy in dense farming conditions where diseases can spread quite quickly. And if these antibiotics are overused or misused, the bacteria in the farmed fish can develop resistance. And when these fish are consumed or when they interact with wild populations, the resistant bacteria can spread. So the real danger here is that these resistant bacteria can make infections a lot harder to treat in both humans and animals. So the infections that once were treatable could become much, much more serious, which can lead to quite significant illness and very high medical costs and also a lot more deaths. One solution is potentially reducing the reliance on antibiotics altogether. So this can be achieved by improving farm conditions to reduce stress on fish and decrease the need for medication. So sustainable farming practices such as providing a lot better nutrition, controlling the water quality, and also using vaccines to prevent disease. These can all really help minimize the need for antibiotics. And also another solution is potentially adopting stricter regulations on the use of antibiotics in aquaculture. So in so many countries, the use of antibiotics in farmed animals is quite heavily regulated, and some are even banning the use of certain antibiotics in aquaculture together. So this is a really good start. But research into alternative treatments like probiotics or plant-based medicines could really, really help reduce the reliance on antibiotics. And also, I just wanted to add that monitoring and surveillance are also quite essential. So regular testing of farmed fish for antibiotic residues and resistant bacteria can really help to identify and manage this antimicrobial resistance before it spreads further.
So obviously with the expansion of the aquaculture industry, it's kind of inevitable then that some traditional fishermen are gonna kind of be forced out of a job. How do you think then that the expansion of this industry has affected traditional fishermen? And also, how do you think it will continue to affect them, and especially the communities that are built around this practice?
Yeah, well, it does have quite significant impacts on traditional fishermen and their communities. So there are both positive and negative impacts, actually. So looking at the positive side, aquaculture can provide an alternative or supplemental source of income, especially in areas where these wild fish stocks are dwindling due to overfishing. So it can also create jobs in local communities, and it can really support economic growth. However, on the flip side, the growth of aquaculture can also create competition for space and resources. So as fish farms expand, they often take up coastal areas that have historically been used by small-scale artisanal fishermen. So this can really limit access to fishing grounds, it can disrupt local ecosystems, and it also can reduce fish availability for traditional fishers. So also, in addition, the environmental impacts of aquaculture, such as the water pollution, the nutrient runoff, and the disease transfer, essentially everything we've spoken about so far, can really undermine the health of marine ecosystems. This is quite bad because many coastal communities do really rely on these marine ecosystems for both livelihood and cultural identity. So this can really lead to a decline in wild fish populations and further harm traditional fishing practices. But economically, large-scale aquaculture operations can really overshadow the smaller community-based fisheries, and this shift towards industrialized fishing can lead to the loss of control over fisheries, and it can really threaten the traditional ways of life that have been passed down through generations. So while I do think it has the potential to support local economies, I think that it really must be managed carefully to ensure that it doesn't harm traditional fisheries or the communities that depend on them. So I think that balancing the two really requires thoughtful planning, sustainable practices, and a big collaboration between the aquaculture industry, fishers, and also local governments.
So what's your thoughts on labour practices in the aquaculture industry, and how can we ensure fair treatment of workers?
So I do think that labour practices in aquaculture are quite a concern. So the workers in some regions are facing really low wages, long hours, and also very unsafe conditions. And I do think that to ensure fair treatment, stronger labour laws and enforcement are definitely essential. So I think that certification systems like the Aquaculture Stewardship Council can really help set the standards for both environmental and labour conditions. And additionally, I think that supporting unionisation and providing proper training and protective equipment could really improve these pretty horrific working conditions in some cases. So in short, I think the fair treatment of workers requires a lot better regulations, transparency, and also a focus on human rights across the industry.
Just like Rosie said, by addressing these issues head on, the aquaculture industry has an opportunity to create a fairer, more sustainable system for workers and consumers alike. It's not just about protecting the workers, it's also about building a seafood industry that people can trust.
So how do you feel about the welfare of animals then in aquaculture? So based on current obviously practices, what changes would you like to see within the industry as a whole?
Well, I think like everything else really that we've talked about in this episode so far, it is also quite a major concern. So the farmed fish are often kept in very crowded and stressful conditions that, as we know, can lead to disease, and these can also lead to injuries and also very poor overall health. So yeah, I think a lot of things can really compromise these animals' well-being. And for me, I think overcrowding would be the worst. I absolutely hate crowded environments. But to improve animal welfare, I think I'd like to see stricter regulations on stocking densities, a lot better water quality management, and 100% the reduction of antibiotics and chemicals in these farming practices. So I think a lot more emphasis should be placed on breeding fish that are less prone to disease and stress. Additionally, I think that transparent monitoring systems, such as third-party certifications, can really help ensure that these farms adhere to higher welfare standards. But yeah, in short, I think that focusing on improving the living conditions, reducing stress, and really prioritizing animal health is absolutely crucial for the future of sustainable aquaculture.
So obviously speaking of fish, obviously we touched on earlier about genetically modified fish. Now this is typically something the public gets very concerned about. I know people hear the phrase transgenic fish or mutant fish and they kind of go a bit crazy. But do the potential benefits of these genetically modified fish outweigh the ethical and environmental concerns? Or do you think it's a practice we should try and stay away from?
Well, yeah, I do think there are quite significant ethical and environmental concerns. And one real issue that I find is the potential for these genetically modified fish to escape into the wild. And then these genetically modified fish can interbreed with native species. And this can really disrupt ecosystems and affect biodiversity. So I think that very strict regulations and monitoring are very essential. But yeah, on the other hand, there are benefits. Obviously, the fish grow faster, they require less feed, and they can really help to meet the increasing global demand for seafood, without putting further pressure on the wild fish populations. So I do think that genetically modified fish could significantly contribute to global food security. But yeah, I just think that the ethical and environmental risks are pretty substantial. And obviously, there are a lot of concerns about consumer acceptance and the long-term health impacts of eating genetically modified fish. Although there are current studies that these fish are safe to consume, you never know what's going to come out in the future. Do the benefits outweigh the risks? I think it really depends on how effectively we can manage and mitigate the potential negative impacts. So I think with strict regulations, robust containment systems, and also really transparent monitoring, I think that genetically modified fish could be part of a sustainable aquaculture. But I think without these safeguards, I don't think the risks could outweigh the benefits.
I think there should be more research that needs to be conducted to study the potential effects of this modified fish into the environment and to people. So that we know what we are looking into. Because right now we're just we don't have like the real evidence for it. And maybe they have the studies, like some of the studies, but I don't think that it's enough to say, okay, I don't want transgenic fish because it's bad for the environment. So we need to do more research about it to be sure.
One thing that I just wanted to add that I find kind of interesting that I remember learning about genetically modified fish is the antifreeze glycoproteins that can be put into fish. And these proteins are naturally found in a lot of cold water fish species, such as ice fish. And these antifreeze proteins help prevent the formation of ice crystals in these fish's bodies, and they do this by binding to the small ice crystals and inhibiting their growth. By inserting these proteins into the fish's genome, by integrating these proteins into the fish's genome, this enables them to survive in a lot colder temperatures. So I think it's quite interesting because we'll be able to raise fish in a lot of different environments. So obviously we have kind of the poles that not really a lot like goes on there. I don't think they're regions that we're kind of only just starting to explore really and learn about. And I think that, yeah, raising fish in these areas could be really interesting. And obviously, this could really expand the geographical range for aquaculture. And a positive of this is that it could potentially reduce the pressure on existing farming areas. So, yeah, I just think it's really interesting to think about all of the modifications that are happening to fish. Even though I do think it's a bit ethically ambiguous, it is interesting to just learn about. And also, can you imagine the marketing of these fish? It would be quite interesting. Imagine going into the shop and buying Antarctic salmon. Do you think there could potentially be a bit of a customer base there?
I think the public is definitely, is it something that you'd want to market towards the public? It's like, sure, if people were farming these fish, is it something you'd want to sell to someone as a transgenic fish? Or do you think it's
Exactly.
better just to hide
Yeah.
it?
But
Mhm.
then what people, I don't know, like really how marketing works. Obviously, I'm not a marketer, but I think that potentially advertising fish as having like been grown in the Arctic or the Antarctic or something could really appeal to people
Yeah,
that
but
don't know much.
yeah, they don't know that it's transgenic fish.
No, but like, I don't know, I'd want to try Antarctic salmon.
Then you wouldn't know if it's transgenic.
No, it's
God,
just interesting that like I just think it's interesting that you can modify something so that it can survive in a different geographical area, obviously with climate change and stuff.
Gonna be helpful.
so what innovative practices have you heard about that could make aquaculture more sustainable?
They have it in Canada, like they use the IMTA system. It is multi-trophic aquaculture. So it combines fish farming with seaweed and shellfish production. So it allows for nutrient recycling and reducing feed inputs. And in also in Norway and Iceland, the use of algae and insect-based viability of alternatives. And they also have the integrated IMA, or the integrated mangrove aquaculture, in fully restoring ecosystem services. It remains under evaluation, but they are using it right now.
I have found a few quite interesting innovative practices. So I know that offshore aquaculture is one, and there's a company called Open Blue that works just offshore, like in from the Caribbean, and farm they farm very deep water offshore fish. So I found it quite interesting because a lot of the time when you think about aquaculture, you think about more like coastal systems, but this company's offshore farms are located in very deep open water, which is very far from the shore. And this is to minimize the environmental impacts. So they farm their fish in submerged cages that are a lot less prone to disease outbreaks, environmental pollution, and this is really helping to protect the wild fish populations whilst also producing sustainable seafood. And there's a few others that I'll just mention, you can cut them out, but there is also automated monitoring and AI that's being used in aquaculture. So AKVA Group, which is a leading provider of technology for the aquaculture industry, has introduced smart fishing systems that use sensors, cameras, and AI to monitor water quality, fish behavior, and feed levels in real time. So their systems can predict fish health and farming needs, and this can really optimize the resource use and also reduce waste. So this kind of more data-driven approach is really helping farmers to improve the efficiency and sustainability of their aquaculture farms, while also minimizing the environmental impact.
So how important do you think government regulation is in ensuring the sustainability of aquaculture?
I think it is very important personally. I think it's absolutely crucial, really, because obviously without proper oversight, I think the industry could really face quite significant environmental and social challenges, so such as overfishing, pollution, habitat destruction, poor labour conditions, you name it. So I do think that effective regulation can really ensure that aquaculture practices adhere to environmental standards, minimizing the risks of all of these things such as water pollution, disease outbreaks. For instance, I think that regulations can enforce limits on stocking densities, which I've already mentioned, and also potentially they could establish buffer zones to protect more sensitive ecosystems and obviously set water quality standards. But yeah, also in some countries, regulations mandate the use of sustainable feed sources, and this reduces reliance on wild caught fish for fish meal. But yeah, I also do think that regulations can promote transparency and accountability within the industry, ensuring that fish farms operate ethically and fairly. So obviously, this includes protecting workers' rights, improving animal welfare standards, promoting fair trade practices. And I think that governments can also incentivize sustainable practices through subsidies or certifications like the Aquaculture Stewardship Council. And this sets guidelines for both environmental and social responsibility.
So finally, how can local communities be more involved in promoting sustainable aquaculture practices?
There are several ways that they could contribute. So I think obviously having quite an active participation in stakeholder dialogue. So I think that communities, and especially those ones living near the aquaculture farms, should be included in discussions about location, scale, and methods used in these farming operations. But yeah, I think that involving local fishermen, environmental groups, and residents in planning can really ensure that these aquaculture practices align with local needs and environmental concerns. And I think that community-based decision making can also really help balance economic benefits with environmental protection. A few other things, obviously advocating for sustainable practices, engaging in education and awareness, supporting sustainable local aquaculture operations, monitoring, reporting, collaboration with NGOs and governments potentially. Yeah, I think that local communities are really essential to promoting sustainable aquaculture. And I think that by engaging in dialogue, advocating for change, supporting these sustainable practices and monitoring farm activities, they can really help to ensure that aquaculture benefits both people and the environment. Also, I thought like before we finish, I thought one fun thing to do, I don't know if you guys saw the polls I put on the story the other day, but they got a lot of engagement, and I thought it would be quite fun to go through some of them, the would you rathers, and discuss our answers. The first one I put was, would you rather eat salmon raised with growth hormones or eat wild salmon, sorry, at risk of overfishing?
I would say I might have to be growth hormones simply
Yeah, that's
because
what I was thinking.
overfishing is just, I feel like that's a more significant issue. So if you're
Yeah,
talking about
exactly.
long-term sustainability, I feel like overfishing is quite a big threat to that.
Yeah, and 67% of people agreed that they'd rather eat salmon raised with growth hormones.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's good news.
The next one was, would you rather eat fish raised on chicken manure or eat shrimp grown in sewage water?
First one.
Yeah. I would not want to eat anything that has been raised in sewage water.
Yeah, who would?
Disgusting. I mean, it is a bit gross that they've been raised on chicken manure, but I almost think that, I mean, fish eat disgusting things anyway. Like, I don't know if
So,
you guys have ever dissected fish, but if you look in their stomachs, it is not exactly anything you'd like to be seeing.
do you know squid?
Yeah,
Yeah, do you eat squid? They eat like everything, so their tummy is like
yeah.
basically a shit.
So gross.
So it's gross, and then people still eat it, and I eat it personally. So
Yeah. I
I'd rather eat
mean,
the chicken manure.
yeah, so would I. And 92% of people agreed. I
Okay.
want to know who the 8% were who said they'd rather eat shrimp grown in sewage water. That's
Oh no.
disgusting. Um, I'll choose a few more good ones. Would you rather support farms that overuse antibiotics or support farms that crowd fish in tanks?
Oh no.
They're both
Mm.
awful.
Oh yes.
I
But
feel
I
like for
think
some of these, it's neither.
Yeah, I'd rather neither, but I think I'd rather, oh, I don't know.
can I just like neither? No, but yeah, if I think the latter, I would rather choose this because the antibiotic resistance, oh my God,
Yeah.
it is a very concerning issue right now.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I think, I mean, while I would rather neither, I think in an absolutely extreme case, I'd rather
Mm,
support farms that crowd fish
yeah.
in tanks because antimicrobial resistance is terrible. I'll give one more question. Would you rather drink water from a shrimp pond or lick fish tank algae?
Are the shrimp still in the pond?
Yes.
How about you, Tom?
Uh, maybe
Both are so
shrimp
good.
water, but I'd rather, again, neither
Yeah,
of
but
them are great.
imagine it being aquaculture shrimp water. That is
I
disgusting. But
think
fish
this
tank algae.
this podcast is making me want to go vegan, I can't lie.
Oh gosh, yeah. When I was doing all of my research, I was genuinely thinking I don't know if I can ever eat salmon
I'm never going to look at my fish and
again.
chips the same ever again.
Yeah, like some of, I mean, we've barely scratched the surface here with
Yeah.
aquaculture. There are so many more things to learn about, including dyes that they use to make the fish look more appealing. I think that kind of stuff just really puts me off.
They put something on the fish to make it look fresher also.
Yes, but yeah, I mean, I'll be having my smoked salmon on Christmas morning and thoroughly enjoying it. But maybe not so much this year.